welcome to the podcast, Wait, What Do You Do Again? Where we talk to everyday people doing amazing things. I'm your host, Megan DeFord. Let's go. Today we are talking with Christine E.B. Howard and her work in the innovation ecosphere, how to get involved in nonprofit boards, and her thoughts on leadership and mentorship. Christine, thank you for joining us today. I am really excited to talk to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you've gotten here?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Christine E.B. Howard. I am the founder and CEO of E.B. Howard Consulting. We focus on innovation and the innovation ecosystem, and we do a handful of things for our clients. We find them funding, help them apply for funding, so grant funding, and then help them measure outcomes and provide a little bit of support post-awards. So find, apply, and measure your outcomes in the non-dilutive funding space. So that's specific for the innovation, startup sector, economic development, that's our lane. I'm still working on my tagline. That is an evolving thing that I've been, even as a founder and CEO, it's like, you still try to work on like branding and your phrasing and I still, I'm a business owner and I still mess it up. So I know what we do, but yeah, that's what we do.
Sometimes it's hard to articulate it.
Yeah, it is.
What is innovative, like the innovative space that you're working in with your clients?
So it's mostly it's startups and those that are doing really groundbreaking innovation. So things like, not to put such a fine stamp on it, but like the cure to cancer, using AI to detect cavities in your teeth, like really Star Trek level stuff. That is groundbreaking and novel and has a potentiality for commercialization. That is our lane. We work with higher eds that are maybe focused on that, and they're trying to grow an economic corridor or space around that. A really good example is like Quantum Chicago. We worked with them on their NSF engines application. We were the named evaluator in that. And they're trying to grow a quantum hub where they do like quantum computing and like just everything that goes in that space of quantum. And then there's other areas, that work on like a semiconductor region where they're just trying to create this like economic engine and innovation around semiconductors. And then there's green watershed, water contamination, like name an industry, there's an economic engine propelling that. And especially when it comes to innovation and new ideas and new ways of approaching things. So that's us. Like Star Trek, I always tell people Star Trek's real, not the spaceships, but the technology is coming.
Yes.
The things that you would see in Star Trek are very much like either here or about to be here before we even finish this podcast. It is coming that fast.
That is so exciting.
It is.
In such a very minimal way, like when someone calls me on my Apple Watch, you really feel like you are.
Yeah. And probably next week you'll be able to beam yourself someplace. Like Amazing. It's moving that fast. And just to be able to like scan you and check for like anomalies on your skin and do predictive analysis, like cavity detection in your teeth, or to be able to use AI to do predictive, like, hey, we think that thing based upon historical data is going to turn into a cancer node in your breast or someplace else on your body, or just new ways of administering medicine or new medicines. It can be in any sector, or just how to like filter air, filter water, real-time chemical contamination, like some really like things that we think of the everyday person would think is far out there. It's like people are working on that right now.
It's here, and not to get sidetracked from our conversation today, but you saying that actually makes me understand maybe more of the gravity and breadth of the ethics around AI.
Yeah.
um,
Oh, yeah. And that's something we've been with my team. Like we had to write in our employee manual, we had to write something in to start effective at January 1st about we certainly do use AI. It doesn't take the place of writing or editing like for a human. You still need a critical eye on things. But we use it as an assistive technology. And one of the things that we had to put into our manual was not putting protected client information into the AI because we like as much as the AI says it's not collecting data, we don't know for sure that it's not collecting data. So it's one thing to like refine a sentence or a concept through AI, but to jam the client's like intellectual property in there is a non-starter for us because we just don't know, and that puts us at a liability risk for our clients. So we don't. But I've sent my staff, they've gone to professional development. Like we have a couple of AI tools. Obviously, Grammarly is like the biggest thing right now, but they do use Gemini, they do use Chat GPT and Perplexity. Like those AI tools, like they use them as an assistive technology rather than instead of.
mhm.
But it's something that we've embraced. Said, well, it's here. Let's use it as an assistive technology to help us. Like, if we're working on building our own database for something, like what's missing from this database? What
Yeah,
do we need to add in? Like, it can find those things for you.
it's amazing. How did you get into this work?
Well, it's not a straight path.
Yeah.
So in graduate school for part of my PhD, which I never finished, which is a whole nother conversation. So side note, I just wanted insurance and not have my car break down, and I wanted a job. In graduate school, if you don't have like a scholarship, you have to work. You're going to take on debt. So I was working on my dissertation or what I was going to be my dissertation. My area of focus, I come out of anthropology with a minor in statistics, and it's modern archaeology, and we look at the modern archaeological record in relation to epidemiology and things in the modern archaeological record causing high rates of MS, asthma. So think not necessarily Love Canal, which is in Niagara Falls, New York, but things similar to that, not as like they're not putting plutonium in in the soil or anything like that. But you look at like old landfills and the leaching that was taking place from old like pre-1933 landfills and what was in there, and then what are the health effects in the water system as it relates to that. So think in a way, a little Aaron Brockovich, a little bit Lois Gibbs from Love Canal. That was my specialty lane. And I was talking to one of my advisors, which was from the chemistry department of all places, who was involved with the chemical and chemistry analysis for the soil samples we were taking for a behavioral health study, which was all part of the work that I was doing. And I was telling him, I need health insurance. I need to function. I need to be able to afford groceries. I got to get a part-time job. And he's like, I know someone who started a firm. They're using stats. They're using data. This is your background. You love sifting through data. They don't do the grant writing, but they do something called evaluation. And I'm like, I'm at the University of Buffalo. I never heard of evaluation. Like there wasn't a department for it. I had no idea what this was. And I'm like, sure, survey analysis, data collect, I can do that. Yeah. And I went and interviewed and got the job. Became an evaluator. And I did that for almost 10 years. And then I was laid off. They were restructuring, doing whatever. At the time, I was devastated, like
Mhm.
rocked my world. I thought this was the path I was in, like, and I had been fired from like Subway when I was a teenager because I had a mouth or whatever.
Sure.
Like, yeah,
Sure.
teenage jobs, but I'd never like been laid off before or fired as an adult. And I'm like, what the heck is this? My identity was just rocked. And I started going to job interviews almost immediately. And it took a while. And we had already planned a family vacation. And I'm in Buffalo, and we were going to head out to LA to see a friend, and we went out to see a friend and we're hanging out and we're having cocktails, and I'm like, I'm going to these job interviews and they're I don't want to work for these people. The pay appears to be great. What I would be doing wouldn't be too far different from what I'm doing, what I did before as an evaluator. But I could just see the toxic environment just upon entering the building for an interview or during the interview process. You could just see like leadership, like you could see how employees react when leadership would walk into the room, or just how people would conduct themselves, or just how people manage themselves. Like if leadership was in the room with like, I don't know, like a mid-level person and they brought them in to help conduct the interview, and you could just see the toxicity, and it's just how they framed the questions, and just you could pick the vibe up, and I'm like, I do not want to work for these people. This is and I just got out of an environment where there was some element, it wasn't always that way, but there was some element of like, there were good days, there were bad days, like in any place of employment. But I had just said, I don't want to work for that. I need to find a place that has, for like a better phrasing, good vibes. People
Mhm.
are treated well, treated like human beings, respectfully. And I just didn't want to deal with that behavior. I thought I had matured enough in my life. I'm like, there's got to be a work environment that doesn't have this. How is it that I'm going to all of these interviews and this is happening? And my friend at the while we were, he's like, I don't know why you're wasting your time going for interviews. Why don't you just start your own company? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I grew up working class. Like you went to work, you had this mindset of like, you work really hard, you're going to get recognized, you're going to be promoted, you put in a good work day. There's that blue collar mindset that I grew up with. So starting a business was not in my vocabulary at all. Like, yeah, I had like, I played restaurant on my parents' front porch, or maybe had a lemonade stand or whatever, but that just wasn't like how I thought. And meanwhile, and I just want to, just some side context. My
Mhm.
husband is my biggest cheerleader, my biggest advocate. And he had been saying from day one, start your own business, start your own business, start. I wasn't listening to him. I'm like, what the hell does he know? He doesn't know any, like, he
Right.
doesn't know what I'm dealing with. Well, I don't even know. And he's like, no, you should do this. You should do this. It wasn't until our mutual friend said it to me, then like it clicked. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should. And there's EB Howard Consulting was literally born in a bar on the Sunset Strip in LA, because somebody else other than my husband told me to do it.
Right.
And to say, like, my husband has always been my biggest advocate. I needed to hear it from somebody else, because sometimes you don't know if the person closest to you is just cheering for the sake of cheering, or are they like, do they really mean it? I mean, of course he really meant it, but I didn't know that. I
Well,
didn't.
and he's not impartial. He loves you.
Right,
It's like
right,
you can
of
do
course.
anything.
Quite a
Yeah.
bit of biasness. Yeah. And we just had our 18th wedding anniversary yesterday, like the day before we're recording this podcast. So like we've been together a long time. And so I started my business, and that's how I started. And I started by myself. It was just me for years. And then finally I'm like, I got to bring someone in to just do some basic data entry. And it just started growing from there, like handing some things off piece by piece by piece, handing some elements of the business off so that, we could grow. And now I've gone from having just, a handful of contractors in the door to I have W-2 employees. We don't have any contractors right now. I'm not anticipating contractors, although it could happen in the future.
How exciting that you've been able to create an environment that you
Mhm.
probably were seeking. Can you talk a little bit about how your leadership style has developed and how you have brought people on and mentored them, and maybe what advice you would give to individuals who are moving from an individual contributor to someone who is managing a team, or someone like yourself who maybe you're starting out, and as
Yeah.
you onboard people, what did you want as an employee and how did you fold that into now what you're doing?
I wanted servant leadership is what I wanted. And I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. I wanted a leader at the time that was gonna, if you take care of your employees will take care of the company. And that's the mindset. I wanted that because somehow in the back of my mind, I knew that was gonna work. I've seen the authoritarian do as I say, do my orders, do it now, do it before I blink kind of mindset. And I'd worked for individuals like that in the past. Uh, I had a job between graduate school and then that eval firm where it was, if you so much as even left 3 minutes early, you got yelled at. You know, you had to take permission to take time off from work if you were going to get married. And that may not have been approved. I know that had happened to a couple of colleagues that I had worked with. Like they would literally, it was they're going to be, they wanted the Friday off before their wedding on a Saturday, and they wanted to be asked for that time off. And I'm like, they're getting married. Give them the time off. What does it matter? What does it matter if they're
Right.
off on Friday? Actually, give them the whole week so that
Yeah.
because it's chaotic. But just that mindset of, or you're 5 minutes, you leave 5 minutes early, there was like passive aggressive behavior coming at you. And sometimes it was overt, as well. Like you would get like called onto the carpet for that behavior. There's just not an environment I wanted to be in. And I'm like, there has to be a better way. I sound like an infomercial, like there's gotta be a better way. And it's just, I really believe that deep down inside, there has to be a better way of running a company. And I'm like, well, we're gonna find out because this is how I'm gonna do it. I really believe that like I value my team's input and feedback. I don't want them filtering it for me or sugarcoating it in any way. If we're screwing up, tell me. Uh, Not only tell me how to do it better. Uh, and my team knows they can come at me unfiltered about anything. Like, hey, the way this project, blah, 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 it needs to be blah, blah, blah. So they know I'm like, yes, let's do it. Or, I'll, try to, get to the root of where they're coming from if they're not being clear about it or whatever. But it took a long time to get to that mindset because out of graduate school, I had that you do your job, you work for the boss, you do what you're told, you don't make waves or anything like that. And it wasn't until after my last full-time employment and going for those interviews that I realized, oh, this can't be how everybody's working. I just don't believe it for a
Right.
minute.
Right.
So coming in, starting my business, I mean, I had a couple of contractors like early on, and I had to learn from my own mistakes of my expectations of what I needed from them. And I would ask them to do something, and maybe it wouldn't be exactly the way I wanted it or exactly the way I needed it. And I would have to have them do it over. And, I had to learn from how I communicated with people. So I had my own mistakes. First time, like by myself, fresh out of the box, running it myself, no one to tell me I'm doing it right or wrong. I had to learn for myself. And I made a few mistakes along the way. We had a couple of contractors in that I think to this day, had I gotten it right earlier, they might be with us as a W-2 employee right now. But that's okay because I had to learn, I had to grow, and I had to learn from that. I joined a couple of organizations, like some business organizations, NABO, the National Association of Women Business Owners. I thought that was absolutely essential to my own professional development because I could talk to other business owners who have been through it before, have dealt with starting from scratch. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they purchased the business, or maybe they inherited it in some way, but they were running it. And talking to them, hearing from different industries, different sectors, not like one is in the construction business. You wouldn't think I would have a thing to learn from a construction business owner who's a women-owned business, learning about how she handles her employees and what does she do? What does she learn that works? What doesn't? What happens when you have an all-male staff and you're the woman as a business owner? Like, how do you cross that bridge? How do you handle it? Another individual in my life, had worked for a big law firm and then started her own law firm. And now she's like, it is on par with that firm that she had worked for, and it has a nationwide reach. Um, it's being around other women really, and in similar positions motivated me because I could see what was working. I could tell them what I was dealing with, what my barriers were, and getting like raw, unvarnished advice from them was absolutely essential. So my own professional development was essential to get either validation I am doing it the right way, or, hey, you know what? You need to do this. And here's why. So there wasn't a shortage of learning on my end by any means. Leadership doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the boss.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be the boss to be a leader. You can, any position you're in, you can demonstrate leadership quality. So don't let the fact that maybe you're not, overseeing anybody be the reason you can't be a leader. Leadership can show up in many different ways. And I've learned that through mentorship. Some of my biggest learning moments, I have two mentees right now that I have. And I've learned more from them than some of my own professional development about some of the things and the challenges they're dealing with that I also dealt with, but they are coming up with a different approach or have a different lens in how they view it. And I'm just impressed at how they handle things and just tackling it head on. There's a phrase, in sailing, in boat world, like when you see a storm, it's best not to like you sail into it, or you have to hit it head on. And seeing them hit it head on and tackling it is impressive. I've learned more about tackling things head on and just either facing the consequences or dealing with the roadblock and barrier and just be like, okay, fine, let's do it. The quicker I face it head on and deal with it, the quicker I can get past it and grow and evolve from it. Taking on mentees, I never thought I would be a person like, who wants to hear me? Who wants to listen to what I have to say? But I've learned to be like a sounding board about like, is this the right approach? Is this the right methodology? Should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? And learning how to give advice in a constructive way that they can take it or leave it, which is fine. But just knowing that they have a place to come to and just talk about anything at all, within the guise of their mentorship. Like sometimes personal life affects your ability to do your job or to be a leader, and to address those things, hit them head on, allows you to be a more effective leader down the road, whatever that looks like for you. And just taking on a mentee, man, you're gonna learn so much from them. I mean, it's probably one of my best professional development things for myself, just being a mentor for somebody. And it doesn't have to be formal in any
Mm-hmm.
way, shape, or form.
I agree with you. I have been a mentor, and I almost feel like I'm getting way more out of it than the person who came to me. And the other piece that I've learned as I've gotten older is I have someone now who's about 15 years younger than me, who is my mentor, and
Yeah.
don't feel like that person has to be older than you. They're doing
Yeah.
something in a space that I don't really know anything about, and they are awesome. So, mentors, like you said, can come from anywhere. And I honestly, I've had one person who said, I can't help because I don't have time right
Yeah.
now, but I'm going to get you to someone else. Like
Yeah.
I'm full tilt, and people are always happy to help. It's amazing
Yeah.
how people are
Yeah. You
always
just
happy
have
to
to
help.
ask.
Yeah.
Just ask. It doesn't have to be a formal arrangement. It
Yeah.
can just be informal, and age, don't let age be the barrier.
Yeah.
Don't let any demographic indicator be the
Yes.
barrier in approach. You
Yeah.
never know.
Yeah. Find that community that you identify with and just start talking to people. That's
Yeah.
also a really easy way to do it. You are in Buffalo, which is a city that has, I feel like in the past few decades, just really sort of reinvented itself and
Yeah.
invested in itself. Can you talk a little bit about your engagement in the community? And it feels very exciting for a city
Yeah.
that, did you grow up there?
I did not, of
Okay,
all things. So I grew up in the Finger Lakes, which
cool.
is about 2.5 hours from the city of Buffalo. And this is not a knock on my parents, but I'm so Gen X, it hurts. At the time when I was going away to college, I drew like this circle around my parents' house, and I'm like, I'm going to school outside of that circle. You're gonna have to call first before you go. So Buffalo was outside of that circle. It was one of many schools that I got into, and I chose Buffalo because like I can get to my parents' house within 2.5 hours, 2 hours without much effort on my part if I needed to get home for whatever reason. I just didn't feel comfortable leaving the state. And so University of Buffalo was where I came to go to school. And at the time, the Governor Cuomo, before everything happened with Cuomo,
Hmm.
he said, you know what? We need to start investing in other parts of New York State. I'm going to invest $1 billion into Buffalo, in the Buffalo Niagara region. And I'm going to invite people to match those dollars. And part of the Buffalo billions went to creating a startup ecosystem here in Buffalo, and 43 North, which is a big annual pitch competition, and they provided a suite of support services, was created out of the Buffalo Billions. And it started spurring on other things. And I mean, it wasn't the only catalyst, but it was a component of that catalyst. And we started seeing things like the university moved its medical school to downtown in the city, reinvesting in the city. You saw the creation of a medical corridor, and all of this was going on well before the pandemic. And I always said, you can tell that the city is on an upswing by the number of cranes you see in the sky, because there's innovation, that there's economic development going on, there's a buzz, and you could feel it in the air. And people were like getting excited about the city. I mean, even the sports teams started doing well, like the Sabres and the Buffalo Bills. And of course, in the 80s, the Bills had this historic thing of going to the Super Bowl 4 times in a row and losing. And that's a sore spot for all of us. Don't get us wrong. So to have any team going to the playoffs now is a big deal for us. And it's always been the city of good neighbors. I mean, that's the nickname, where, in any disaster, your neighbor's going to be out there helping you. Like, that is just the mindset of the city. And that translates through, you probably have heard about the Bills Mafia,
Yes.
where they just, like, everyone in the city will band together and donate to a specific cause and raise money. When Damar Hamlin
Hmm.
was injured, everyone would just donate under the Bills Mafia and made his charitable cause, like, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, they got an obscene amount of money and donations under the Bills Mafia like mindset. Like, it's how people are here. And it's everyone helps everyone, it's very community oriented. And you're seeing that come through in the innovation and the economic, reinvestment within the community, and the growth in the university, and some of the other higher ed institutions around here that have gone from being colleges are now universities. So we've seen those things happen here in the city. I mean, there's still a ways to go. And, locally, I was involved in 10,000 villages. That's, something, and I helped move it from a suburban locale to downtown Buffalo. And that was an undertaking, moving a store from a suburb locale to downtown Buffalo. Like that was dealing with the lease and making sure all the items get moved and everything gets packaged and boxed and set up. Like
Right.
it's a challenge moving a nonprofit store. NABO, there's a local chapter here. I was heavily involved in NABO here. I was on their board and just like helping propel the local women-owned business community and getting women-owned businesses involved. And the nice thing about NABO is it's there's no politics involved, so you can be left or right. And when you come into NABO, it's about the business. It's not about your political identity. So it's really refreshing to be around business owners from all walks of life in different stages and talk to them. And so you've got that. There's all sorts of other networking opportunities here. And the region's really trying really hard to take this forward-thinking approach. How do we do things differently? Once known for being one of the first cities to have electricity, at the turn of the century, it was nicknamed the City of Light, because it was one of the first places to have electricity. And to do that, and like, how do we build on where the windshield wiper was invented or the air conditioner, or like a lot of things come out of the city out historically from Buffalo. How do we build on that? How do we spur on innovation? How do we grow the community? And that's a continuous conversation among networking groups and organizations. Like, how do we keep propelling the first of? We don't want to be the last. We want to be the first, and certainly not the last to do something. So our weather isn't always awesome. I have a long track record. Most of the time, the snowstorms, when you hear about it, it's because it's a major national storm coming through. But most of the time, the snow goes south, way south of the city, and there's ski country down there. But, most of the time, the weather's pretty reasonable here. Uh, regardless of what's
Well,
in the national news.
yeah, and it's like anything, right? Like I'm in
Yeah.
South Florida and people think I'm crazy for living here because of hurricanes, and you're like, you can see it, and you just do your thing. And I
Um,
actually think it helps build community in many ways
Yeah, I
because,
think so too. I think that's how you get to know your neighbors. And you got to go cut a tree branch down or help someone who gets stuck in a snowbank, or,
yeah,
you might be dealing with something different. But it still gets you out and helping your neighbor. And
yeah,
yeah,
100%. That's really exciting. It's, it must be so much fun to be in these different groups and see the work that you're doing actually take place and at that citywide scale is pretty
yeah,
awesome. You mentioned you came from a working class background. I did
yeah,
as well. And in my experience, owning your own business wasn't really a thing.
yeah,
Joining professional organizations, I
yeah.
just had to figure out. And you're also involved in your community and on
Yep.
boards. Can you talk about that experience and what were you recruited to those boards or did you
So
seek those out?
what had happened with me, like after I was laid off, as I was starting my business, I was talking to a friend of mine and I had said, I need to, because I'm working out of the house, I need to socialize. And I circled around joining some like social clubs. Like, I don't want to call them country clubs, but they're in that same vein where they're
Yeah.
social clubs. I circled around it and I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. I didn't, again, coming from a working class background, I just felt like I didn't fit into that scene. That wasn't something that I grew up with, being a part of a club in some way, shape, or form. Like, I need to socialize with people. And I need something that's a little rewarding. And don't get me wrong, I have a great circle of friends, but I needed something a little bit more. And my one friend had mentioned, maybe you should do some volunteer work. You're a big advocate for women and women's equality and having a seat at the table. why don't you go volunteer for 10,000 villages? I'm like, what's 10,000 villages? She's like, oh, this is going to be your jam. It's a boutique. They're nonprofits. Each boutique is its own nonprofit, but it's part of a national organization. And they find artisans in emerging economies, women who are making things, and they buy from those artisans in those emerging economies. One, it's giving that woman a sale, like they're getting a sale and at a fair market rate. So it's fair labor, fair pay. And we get the artists and crafts in the 10,000 villages stores. And I started volunteering there, and I was talking with the executive director, and we were just like chitting and chatting and having a cup of coffee. And I would volunteer like once a week. I would go in for like a whole day and be there and help like with setting the store and setting the merchandise and running the register, just volunteering, hanging out. She's like, you should join our board. I'm like, I don't know. And that wasn't the first time I was on a board. I had been on one a couple years prior, like the first dog park in Buffalo, New York. I was on the board for the LaSalle Dog Park when it was the first. And it really, we got together like once a month. It really didn't operate the way I see boards operate now that I've been on a few boards. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if she's like, come just to a meeting and you'll see. And then you can decide if I'll put your resume in for the board and they can interview you and whatever. So I went through it, and then they were like, the United Way has board training. And I'll say this, not all United Ways are the same. And if you can find board training at your local United Way, take it. It's typically either online. At the time when I took it, it was in person. It was 5 nights in a row, and they fed you food. You were at like a banquet facility, but you went over like your fiduciary responsibility as a board. You learned what that meant. You learned what governance meant. You learned like all the things that are appropriate here in New York State for you that you need to know as a board member to just really be an effective board member. I'm like, oh, this was great. I spent $200 on it. It was well worth it. Then when I came to join 10,000 Villages Board, I had been through it, and I knew how to I knew what to expect. And then I served on the board for a while, and eventually I became the board chair. I did that for 2 terms. And then, my term was up, I left the board. By then I had joined the NABO board, and I was in the process of becoming the board chair again. And my husband jokes that I am a perpetual joiner and that inevitably I end up running it. Like this is what happens to me. And true to form, I'm sure here I am again. I am board chair for the CCNY here in Buffalo, which is a nonprofit evaluation firm. And I'm on another board for the Upstate Capital Foundation. I recommend anyone, if you can take that nonprofit board training, do it. It's worth it because it just gives you a foundation of what to expect. And what should ideally be happening with a board. Now, not every board is functional or operates efficiently or does things the right way, but at least gives you an underpinning of what to expect by being on a board. I think that was money well spent, and I highly recommend finding board training. And if you are in a position of leadership for a board, encourage your incoming board members or your current board members to go to board training because it's just going to make them more effective board members.
My background is in philanthropy, and I've done a lot of board work. And one of the things that I've experienced professionally, and then I also look at boards, is it's often not all boards, but it is
Yeah.
often white males. And that I think can be so intimidating for anyone who doesn't identify as a male and white. Um,
Yeah.
what advice would you give to get over that? Like, what is the point of a board? Because I think that's also the other thing is someone who came from a background where boards seemed like, oh, that's in a movie about Wall Street or something like that.
Yeah,
Like, why do
yeah.
boards really exist and why is diversity on boards so important?
So boards in the nonprofit space exist because in the nonprofit space, there isn't a business owner. And you need some type of governance and oversight over the operations of the nonprofit. So you'll have your executive director and that leadership under the executive director, but who's managing that executive director? Because the executive director doesn't own the nonprofit. They're running the nonprofit, but they need guidance. They need a place to talk to people about, like, here's what I'm dealing with. Think of the board as a cabinet for the executive director, more like an advisor. Yes, there's some decisions that the board can make. It's more of like an advisory board. I mean, it is a nonprofit board, so they oversee all the financials. They don't do the financials, they just view the financials and vote on the budget, make sure things are happening the way they're supposed to be, making sure that the regulations are being followed, and then guiding the nonprofit in like what direction, what is the strategic plan of that nonprofit, either for growth or stability or sustainability in some way. They're there as an advisory council, but also have that element of oversight to make sure things are going in the right way. So that is, in a nutshell, the board itself. I've been in that situation where I'm the only woman in the room. And sometimes it is just all men, all white men. I don't have really good advice on how to get past it other than rip the band-aid off and go. You have valid experience and valid knowledge, and your voice matters. And when you are the only one at the table, you do have to, pipe up and chime in. But you still have to follow the regulations. You can't just, steamroll everybody. Not that
Right.
anybody is. You want to come in and you want to lend knowledge and expertise. But the diversity on the board is so valuable because there's different perspectives and different viewpoints that sometimes people don't. If everyone comes from a similar background, how are they going to know that there's a different opinion or a different approach process for handling something? Or just even when we're talking about strategic planning, like where does that nonprofit go at some point in the future? How do you know that you've included everyone's voice and make sure that it's what you're proposing is effective and appropriate for that nonprofit? It's easy to be like in an echo chamber. And so having diversity, and diversity is more than just ethnicity and race. It's age, it's industry, it is cultural backgrounds. It should be multifaceted. Diversity should be. So think, don't forget the disabled population, accessibility. So you want to make sure that you're serving everyone. So you really need to have a nice cross section of the population that you're trying to reach as a nonprofit. So you really want that diversity in the board. And that means different economic structures or backgrounds. You want that. You want people from the working class. You want people that are middle class. Yeah, you want the upper class, but you need a nice spectrum of that on the board. And also experience levels. You need people who have been on a board or two, but also people, this is their first time, being on the board. Or maybe they're fresh out of college, or heck, still in college. It is okay if they're still in college and on a board for the very first time. You want that. Or maybe they're not in college at all and they're fresh out of high school. Bring them in. And if you're serving a K-12 audience, someone from the K-12 system should be on that board. High school students should be on that board. And you should have their voice represented on that board. So yeah, I mean, it really just diverse voices really help you consider perspectives that maybe weren't up on the table before and really make your nonprofit more effective at the end of the day is really what it comes down to. And that's the same for whether it's a nonprofit or you have a higher ed institution or you have an advisory board and you're part of a startup community. You need that diversity. It can't just be one type of individual. If you're talking about the startup community, again and again, I see within startups, their boards, their advisory boards are typically white males,
Hmm.
affluent white males.
Hmm.
They do not bring in people who are going to be using their product. They typically do not bring in, different incomes, different income backgrounds, different ethnicities, different educational backgrounds. They typically don't.
Hmm.
And the individuals that are on their board are focused about one thing, revenue.
Hmm.
And that's it. They're not thinking about how to better serve their clientele or how to better serve their employees as they grow and scale. They're not thinking about those things.
It's so important as board members and as leaders to actively solicit that diversity and that
Yes.
viewpoint, and not only to very clearly articulate the mission and the goal, but also to the other board members what you're looking for. And I've certainly been the only female in the room, and that's never bothered me. It's, I think, just my personality. It doesn't bother me. But it wasn't until I was actually at a networking event and it was all men. Um, and there was one other woman, and I was the staff person. And she came up and said, "This was great. I haven't come because I feel intimidated."
Yeah.
And I said, "Look, anytime you want to come, I will make sure that I'm here." But that's when it really hit me. I was like, this
Mhm.
feels great, but actually it's not. Like when you take a step
Yeah.
back and look around the room, this is not representative of what we want and what the mission of this is. And as I built relationships with individuals, you start to understand who gets it and you charge them. And then it just builds from there. And I think that's so important.
It is.
And we can all, to your point, we can all be leaders, whether you are actually the person who's the chair or someone who's a volunteer. We can all have leadership in that way. So I love what you're saying about it needs to represent multiple people and who you are
Mhm.
serving. And you've certainly incorporated that into your staff as well,
Sure.
really getting that feedback, which I think is so critical. So I ask the three same questions
Yeah, yeah.
to all of my guests, and we've touched on this a little bit, but what do you love most about what you do, whether it's professionally or in your volunteer work? What gets you the most excited?
There's a couple of different things. I love seeing ideas become reality. And especially when it comes to innovation, that is like the Star Trek nerd in me is like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. When's the photon beam coming? Let's do it. I'm excited about that. Anything that is gonna spur on innovation and those ideas become reality. Oh yeah, like that gets me up. The other thing is my mindset has always not subscribing to the status quo. And maybe that is a little bit of I don't know if it's a Gen X mindset. I don't know or not, but it's like kick the door down. Let's stop doing the way it's always been done for the sake of the way it's always been done. And that gets me excited. And some of that leads into the innovation mindset. Like, why do we have to go into an office structure and work 9 to 5? Why does it have to be? Why do we have to subscribe to that model? And the fact that like my business is 100% remote based, like it's out of my house. I'm in one of the rooms that I've converted to an office in my house, and it doesn't have to always have been just because it was done that way doesn't mean you have to keep doing it that way. And that has always been a mindset behind how I think about a lot of things. Just because it's done that way doesn't mean you have to keep doing it that way. There's a better way. There's always a better way to do something. Even when you think you found a better way, there's always another better way
Right,
eventually. And it's
right.
part of evolution and it's part of
Yeah.
evolving.
I do think there's something about Gen X that separated itself from the boomer generation,
Yeah.
or I get the baby boomer generation. I
Yeah.
shouldn't just call them boomers. But I do think there's a distinct line there. And then also in hearing you talk and your background, even in your studies, looking at what did we do? What were the effects and how do we do it differently? So you've got that really nice combination there. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh man, I should have done it sooner. I don't know what I was waiting for. And maybe I needed to be working for somebody else for time, from the moment I got out of graduate school to when I started in 2013. Maybe I needed that time to learn and grow, but there's certain things that I just think like I don't know if I would have any real advice for myself. I really don't. My mindset has always been one way or another, I will land on my feet. With somehow, some way, I'm not gonna fret about like having, the apple cart overturned or anything like that. Like this too shall pass. And I've had my fair share of like really, really tough situations in my life. And those eventually pass. Time passes. And I think maybe there is something I would tell myself, which is, you're going to get past this. And at the time, I may have been upset about something. I may have held on to something. This too shall pass. Eventually, times time passes, and take advantage of that.
We think even these really huge things in our lives that we all experience, right? Like, how are we going to get through it? It just feels so cataclysmic. And then you look back on it later and you're like, oh, like you getting laid off, that's huge. That is
Yeah,
huge and it is life changing.
yeah,
And you pivoted into life changing in such a positive way for yourself
yeah,
and for so many others. So I think that's beautiful. This too will pass. You will get
yeah,
through it. It's a moment in time.
yeah.
How can people find you?
Wherever you can find Christine E.B. Howard online, you can find me. Of course, ebhoward.com is our business website, and you can always schedule a consult call with me if you want to talk about evaluation, you want to talk about grant writing in the innovation ecosystem or funding or whatever. You can always find me through that way. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course. If you can find Christine E.B. Howard, that's chances are it's me.
It's you.
It's me. I'm on almost all social media platforms. I think I have a small presence on TikTok, and that's probably my number one barrier right now, my own hang up. Like I'm not comfortable with videoing myself
Yeah.
just yet. And I recognize that is the new frontier, and I have to embrace it. And I'm just not quite ready to be me on there.
Mhm. Well, we'll have all of your information on socials and the website so people can find you. Thank you so much.
Oh
You
yeah,
are
it's
incredible.
a
This was a great
conversation.
conversation. Anytime you want to come back on, let me know if you think about something else. And
Oh yeah.
I really appreciate your expertise in sharing it.
Well, thank you for having me.
If you'd like to hear more about how Christine has structured her business and the benefits that she offers her employees, stick around for after the outro music. Thanks again for joining. Like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Bye! Thanks for listening to Wait, What Do You Do Again? For more information about today's guest, or if you'd like to be on the show, please visit megdeford.com. See you next time.
We just last year got everybody health insurance. They don't have to pay a dime on their health insurance. We pick up that tab because my mindset is if they're thinking about their health insurance, they can't focus on work. Because they're paranoid about how much is coming out of their paycheck to pay for health insurance. And so we pick up that cost. We picked up dental vision for everybody. We have life insurance. We have disability insurance now. That was a huge leap forward for us to make sure like our benefits were in place and that people felt like, okay, I can just work, get the job done, and then just not think about like having to worry about like if I got to go to the doctor, I got to go to the doctor, but the health insurance component that does not come out of their check. We do that, and then we have generous paid time off for people. They have unlimited PTO, and I know there's like a toxic element of unlimited PTO, like people just tend not to take it. So what we did is we folded in, you have to take a week every 6 months. You have to take a week off. Doesn't have to be consecutive, however you want to do it. But I've folded that in for people. That way they're not feeling like they have to, like they can't take PTO when they want it. Plus, we have a very flexible work schedule. Like everyone's remote. The day starts around between 8 and 9 o'clock, depending on where you are. And then We end our day taking consult calls with clients all the way like at 4, and then you're off the grid at 5. Like there's no email response. You're not talking to clients. I don't want people talking after hours with clients because there's that mission creep that happens inevitably. We're 100% remote based, and we've been remote since day one when we started. So you got to be able to like shut the door at the end of the night and leave your work office and live your life and be a human being and function. And anyway, so that's E.B. Howard in a nutshell, like how we got there, what we're doing, how we grew.